Hey there, welcome to the Multifamily Mixtape Podcast, brought to you by Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Mark Sharp. Multifamily Mixtape is an eclectic podcast as we will discuss any and all things multifamily, from maintenance how-to videos to interviews with industry experts. So sit back, relax, grab a drink, and join me for some campfire-style conversation and maybe a few laughs. Hey everyone, welcome to the Multifamily Mixtape, the podcast where everything's made up and the points don't matter. Today's just going to be a weird podcast. I have so many things in the works and schedules just keep getting moved and things get moved around. But I'm actually, this podcast will come out a couple days after when I would normally release. And I've been busy. I've been busy. There's a lot going on, but we're working on getting some phenomenal content created, and unfortunately, schedules just don't line up when you want them to. So you make do, and this is one of those podcasts where we're going to make do. And I've decided it's going to be a little different than normal. I'm just going to tell you a story. That's really it, right? But on my statement when I opened this episode about everything being made up and the points don't matter, if you know where that's from, comment on the YouTube version of this, and I will mail you a Multifamily Mixtape hat. First one to comment. Tell me where that comes from. You get a free hat. All right, story time. So outside of my normal job and podcasting, I like to buy things that have been returned through Amazon or Overstock or just any place that has returns and you can bid like auction items type things. I have a nerd side of me, and I like to take things apart and see if I can fix them. So I purchased an air purifier, and this was a big one. This was a big, I think it was supposed to purify up to 1,800 square feet. Huge, big, heavy thing. And I saw that it had been returned, and I went to look at it, and I took it out of the box and I plugged it in at the facility, and I could hear what was happening. So I understand why the person who purchased it returned it, because something was obviously broken. And, you know, me doing this for a while, I kind of had kind of figured what the problem would be. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna buy this air purifier in hopes that I can fix it, or that I think I know what the problem is. So I buy the air purifier, and I get it home, and it sits in my garage for months, no exaggeration, months. And I tend to put things up on Marketplace for sale, and then if it gets interest, then I'll look into it. Well, it sat on Facebook Marketplace for a long time, and no one showed any interest in it, so I forgot about it. I mean, if no one's interested, I'm not going to invest my time or money, and it'll just be a lesson learned. So we started to get some interest on the air purifier, and I thought, well, okay, now I have to figure out what's wrong with it. And I didn't contact the person who was interested until I knew for a fact that I could fix it. So it wasn't anything shady going on. It just, anyway, it's just me and how I work. So I get this air purifier, I bring it into my kitchen, and I flip it upside down, and had those little bitty screws in it. And so like my drill, I didn't have a drill bit small enough, or a bit small enough to get into the grooves of those screws. So I had to manually, twist these screws out. And God, so many screws. So I'm taking this thing apart, and I finally get to what I think the problem is, which is it had a squirrel cage in it, a lot like an evaporator does. And so there was a fan and there was a fan motor, and the motor mounts on the fan motor were broken. And so the way the shaft went through the blades, which pulled the air in, it was tilted. So when you plugged it in, it was scraping the sides of the housing. So that's what the sound was, and that's kind of what I figured it would be. So I did a little bit of research, and I found out about the motor mounts where that fan motor was connected to the squirrel cage, and how a lot of times in shipping, those things get damaged. So I said, let me figure out a way I can repair these motor mounts. Of course, I looked online to see if I could buy them, just buy new motor mounts, but of course, you can't. So I got a drill bit and some wooden dowel rods, and I kind of like you would do like a wood repair. So I drilled a hole, I ran a wooden dowel through the motor mount, and then I did the same thing on the housing, and then just glued them and forced them together, and used some clamps to clamp everything in and make sure that they were nice and sturdy. They were much better than it was when it came. So probably even overkill, but regardless, I start to put it back together, and the whole time I'm like, God, these freaking screws. So I'm getting all the electronics plugged in. I'm putting all the cover plates back on. I'm putting the wheels back together. Like I'm putting everything back together, and I get it back together. I plug it in. Oh, it's perfect. Ran like it was supposed to. It was nice and quiet. And at that point, I even briefly thought about not even selling it, just keeping it because it was nice. So I paid $42 for this air purifier. I think retail was like $799. So I paid $42 for it. And I spent $10 on a wooden dowel and some glue, right? So I get this thing put back together, and it's operating exactly like it should. It's super quiet. It's pulling in all this air. It's great. So I contact the seller and say, hey, here's what I'm willing to sell it for. And we agree on a price. So I meet him and I sell the air purifier, and all is good. But that's not the fun part of the story. The fun part of the story is that, remember, there's a lot of screws in this thing. So I'm taking them apart, and when I put it back together, I take photos. When I take something apart, I take a picture. So when I put it back together, I know what it's supposed to look like. Okay. So I put everything back together. This thing, it was perfect. But you see this? See that? That's all the screws left over. That's all the screws that didn't get put back in there. So I don't know where they go. I don't know where they went. And I sat there and I was like scratching my head. I have no hair, but so I'm like scratching, like, where do these screws go? I even took off the top and the sides again. I didn't get into the motor part of it and the electronics because that was a pain. That was such a pain. But the sides that I could take off easily and expose everything, I was like 1, 2, 3, 4. I looked back through my photos and said, this is 9 screws. 9 screws and 2 washers. I couldn't find where they went. So I have just made the determination that lost socks in the laundry and lost Tupperware lids get reincarnated as extra screws when you take something apart and put it back together. So I want to know, how many of you out there have taken something apart, put it back together, and had extra screws? I know I missed something, right? Because screws don't just manifest. I trust, I get it. I understand. But I also know that I went back and looked through all the photos, and there are screws accounted for. It's back together. I sold it. I don't even own that thing anymore. But there's 9 screws missing. And I feel bad. Like I do. I feel bad. But I emailed the person who bought it. After he had it for about 10 days, I sent him a message back and just said, hey, just following up on your purchase of your air purifier. Are you still happy with it? He was like, oh my God, I love it. I said, awesome. Meanwhile, I don't know. So, yeah, what have you taken apart and put back together that still works? If you took it apart, put it back together, had leftover pieces and it fell apart, I don't want you to feel embarrassed about that. But if you've taken something apart, put it back together, had leftover stuff, and whatever it is still working, is still running, obviously it didn't need that screw or whatever. So I want to know, what have you done? And should I feel bad that there are leftover screws? This is not the first time I've done this. Not the leftover screws. I'm saying this is not the first time I've taken something apart, repaired it, and sold it. So I kind of have a system. I have a routine, and 9 screws. I don't know. But enough about that. 11 minutes. Shortest podcast for Multifamily Mixtape ever. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you had a good laugh. I know I did, especially when I was just cackling about these leftover screws. Like I don't know where they went. I looked, my girlfriend looked, my daughter looked. We all looked, and it's like I don't see where a screw would go. And everything that needed to be put together was put together and accounted for. It was like, I don't get it. But if you have leftover screws, it's because you lost a sock or a Tupperware lid, or vice versa. I think that could work either way. Anyway, cool. Well, take care. Have a good one, and hopefully we can get some of these other podcasts scheduled, so we can start bringing you some back to our normal content that we like to do here on Multifamily Mixtape. We will catch you on the next one. See ya. Thanks again for taking time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you found it entertaining and insightful. If you like this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other industry podcasts and sponsorship opportunities. And until next time, don't be afraid to crank the volume.